we can get these overlapping moments, and also how culture isn't really bound only by the understanding of language or meanings that are embedded in language. There's also our human capability to sense, maybe in a rather abstract way, the other, or another person's culture. So I wanted to depart from text into the realm of image and sort of hover in between. And this is why the work at Beauty World started off using textual forms from different languages. Of course, like the four main languages that we use in Singapore: Chinese, Javi, Tamil, and also Latin. Plus many other scripts found in the region and also globally. I started from these textual forms and I started to overlap them, find these overlapping areas, and then organize them in a rhythmic pattern that responded to the actual physical site. In order to create an image that sort of hovers between being able to sense the presence of language, but not really being able to understand it as text.
So how do you feel about that? Like this almost draining text of text meaning? Yeah.
I think it's great. It's very interesting because I actually attended a workshop in which I was told to use those. There's a website I can't remember. You can use like the textual forms, like the serifs, the descendants and descendants to make an image. And that was a poetry workshop, right? And so I thought that what you've done is actually poetry, right?
That's great.
And I guess furthermore, now that I think of it, right, the blocks of text that Mr. Widjaja responded to, or like the redacted text, it also kind of functions in that way. It suggests text, but it doesn't actually hold it. Yeah, so it's good resonance.
So that could be art too. Yeah,
I'll let you decide that.
But I think there's something interesting there to say that something is text that used to be, or we can't read it. Yeah. But you're also playing image in the same way, like this image, but you can't quite see it until you work at it. But even then, apart from the inverted pieces, there are a few images that you rephotograph, but then they have a certain amount of blurriness or diffuse light or flare, such that the image is again lost to us. And we're always grasping. So there's something quite interesting about that, this the constant deferment of consistency or deferment of, I don't know, how to refer, specificity, like being sure of yourself.
I think it is necessary in time to stay true to one of the impulses for this project, which is to really expand my understanding of these images, to really open up my otherwise one-track way of understanding these sets of meanings. So I use photographic means to defer and to contextualize and to sort of create gaps for new meanings to be able to enter into these sets of images. And this is where the aesthetic domain became quite useful, because when you look at the photographs, these blurry photographs, they seem to be more concerned with formalistic issues, sensibilities, visual sensibilities, than staying true or accurate document of a historical event.
I just also would like to just touch upon the fact that because with the inverted images, because the labor involved in it is quite intensive, so much so that the viewer will question that. You can almost see the fact that the artist had to spend a lot of time.
Not only time, Panadol too.
A lot of effort. But I know that's interesting because some of the other works have a more sort of process feel. But through your practice, there's a very live element, such that you've done live drawing, you've done sort of movement that results in mark making, And then very recently, Boedi sort of dragged a 25-kilo sack of chalk around London, from East London to the Barbican, leaving one big long trail of chalk everywhere it went, which is great. And so, what is this? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because artists who tend to work into don't always want to step forward or push beyond a certain threshold to perform things like that. What is that thing that sort of makes you take over?
I think it is this idea of space that connects my life art practice or works with the image making aspect of my practice. I was telling you that how in Java we have a big tradition of wayang kulit, these shadow puppets. And if you ever have watched one, you see these shadows being animated by the dalang, and usually with the gamelan, this very spatial experience of sound. The two-dimensional stretch canvas or screen became very, very spatial. It's flat, but the whole enactment of that was very, very was felt in a very visceral and very spatial way. So I could almost find an infinite spatial dimension within that screen. And the live art offers me a medium that really brings me into an actual lift in time-space, of sights and sounds, of the audience, this very strong human presence.
And you made an interesting distinction downstairs. You said, but I don't think of space as social space.
Yeah. Because I never studied sociology, so I don't think of space in that way. I do not frame my discussion, my personal internalization of space in that way. My background is that I studied architecture, so I studied space as almost like a plastic material, as a temporal kind of a dimension, experience buildings and spaces in the presence of time. And also in architecture, we love to talk about using natural light to introduce the sense of time, passing of time. And also material, the material expression of time, the weathering of wood, of concrete walls, and so on and so forth. Hence, I think my understanding and my experience, expression of space has always been rooted more in phenomenology, this idea of the body and sensations, experience, rather than talking about space as this abstract kind of social construct. And that's what I meant.
I think it was interesting because obviously we were in conversation for quite a while when you were developing your piece for London. And it was one thing to discuss it intellectually, but another thing to experience it with you and watch you, sweat and drag that thing in the height of summer across London. And then suddenly realize, like, what is driving Boedi to do this? Because this is really hard work. And then I suddenly had this really weird sensation that you think of the city and the world around you as a very large piece of drafting paper, and you are constantly making marks in all sorts of ways, whether it's using your hand or your whole being in almost kind of pilgrimage way.
Going back to the question about the title, Imaginary Homeland, I find it interesting that you have the word, imagination, which is sort of usually seen as intangible, with homeland, there's the word land there. And as you probably know, ground is a recurring kind of concern. This idea of wanting to reach and to reach ground, to touch ground, to root myself, to feel gravity. And I think that was part of the core ideas behind it. Also, of course, the idea of seeing space as a surface, to mark on.
we're almost coming to an end, but if there's any questions from the audience and people want to ask Boedi anything or Hao Guang anything about the publication.
Yeah, hi.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about your. I didn't know that you came to Singapore at such a young age. I wanted to ask you about whether or not what you've done is kind of different from perhaps older Indonesian Chinese artists like FS, Sono, like Swati and all that. Because some of the, when I first saw the reverse image and some of the blurriness, it reminded me of your works. But they seem to think that it's all about a loss. There's a tremendous amount, a lot of sadness in the work. Kind of being unfair, being mistreated and all that. But your work seems to have gone over that. So do you think you're sort of in that group of kind of the generation of Indonesian artists after the Pasono that somehow has figured out and reconciled the whole thing, like the way you explain, this is my Indonesian name, this is my Chinese name, and that's the way it is, let's get on with it. So that you are kind of, you belong here, there, everywhere, you also belong nowhere, and it doesn't really matter. So is that kind of an accurate impression that I should have that, yes, you kind of remind me a little bit of Pasono, but not really? Because you've moved on, it seems.
Well, the difference between Mr. Arson and me, I guess, is that he stayed and I decided to silently walk away. Until that's okay. Yeah. Which is part of the title of the show. So I think with that, you will see that